today we're going to be looking a little more at the Gunas, psychology, Jyotish, Ayurveda, and how they all really interrelate, interact. And we're just going to give some basic principles and ideas for you to start to explore your chart. And so the first chart we have up here, we want to look at the planets and the gunas that they're associated with. So I've just given the basic list here, and this is one of the many attributes of the planets that are going to help define them more and give us a better idea of how they function, what they do in our chart, and what they bring to our chart. You can see the Sun, Moon, and Jupiter are sattva, and they'll bring up different conditions for sattva and for how the mind is functioning, which we'll look into after this. And then there's Mercury and Venus, which are Rajasic planets, which give a lot of activity for different reasons. Mercury is a more intellectual planet concerned with business and trade and things like that in the world. Venus has more to do with relationships, and which is a very strong form of Rajas as well, and people and talking and socializing and things of that nature. So those are two of the more Rajasic energies. And it's interesting to note that when there's a lot of Rajas, a lot of movement, there's oftentimes a lot of confusion too. And so oftentimes you'll find in Jyotish, people are heavily and primarily concerned with their career, their business life, which is Mercury, and as well as the relationships, if they're going to get married or have kids and this and that, which is Venus. So you'll see this come up time and time again, just in your own personal life, and you see that's because it's a reflection of the Rajasic quality of really wanting to do something, and it's Rajas is a little more of that egoism and self-directed, selfish behavior. And then we come to the Tamas planets, Saturn, Mars, Rahu, and Ketu. And Tamas is an interesting guna because, at one time it can show ignorance and more baser qualities in life. It can also serve a purpose. All these gunas serve a purpose. So Tamas can also be, especially in reference to like a Mars type energy, it can be a destructive force, which can be useful in destroying old patterns and getting discipline, which can be shown by Saturn and Mars. So Tamas isn't totally negative. It may feel negative or harsh sometimes, but it can serve a purpose. And so within the tamasic functions, Saturn can often show underutilization of things. Rahu can show like an improper use of things. Ketu and Mars can often show like accidents or mistakes and things of that nature. So many different ways it's functioning, but these are the basic indications for when you look at a chart. And then along with this, also the planets will carry their basic guna, their basic quality to whatever houses they rule. So you should have, by this point in the game, you should have the house rulerships memorized basically by the back of your hand. I keep emphasizing that's really the gateway into really actually looking at a chart, is having those house rulerships memorized. Should be no question of them by this point. So if you're looking at a Jupiter sign, which is Sagittarius and Pisces, you'll see that those signs are sattvic because Jupiter is sattvic. If you're looking at Saturn sign of Capricorn and Aquarius, those signs are inherently tamasic, and they'll carry with that attribute, and that shows the basic nature of that sign. And depending where it's placed, it can have a strong impact on either that area of the life in a chart. So if it's on the ascendant, that can give a person a stronger pull in that direction with that guna and how it's functioning. And then there's also based on the signs as well, there's what's considered the objective, how the sign is acting out and putting forth its energy into the world and using its resources, and which gives another layer onto this. And basically the dual signs are sattva, the fixed signs are tamas, and the movable signs are rajas. So I won't get too much into this layer of it, but it's just one more aspect of, how these gunas can shift and are relative to functioning in the chart, in the world, and in many different spheres of life. Right now, we're just going to look at the basic indications, the basic understanding of where the predominance is. But just know that there are as many levels to this stuff. And you should hopefully be familiar at this time of the dual fixed movable signs from the last lessons. If not, review that as well and get clear on these basics. I know it's a lot of information to memorize, but this lesson particularly is kind of a pause for you to kind of catch up, look back over anything you might have missed or isn't clear, and hopefully get in touch about it. And now moving on and looking a little more closely at the planets, the sattvic planets primarily. Sattva and the mind have a very close relationship. So as we mentioned in the reading, the healthy, the balanced, the proper state of mind is equal to sattva within these systems. So the mind itself is sattva in its basic form, and it gets agitated by rajas and tamas. When we're looking to see how disease, how problems are being created by a person in a chart, we're going to try to look at what's harming and influencing those sattvic influences in our chart to see where and how a person is getting out of balance at a really basic core fundamental level, which is pretty deep really, and it goes pretty far. And so we look at all these indications in Ayurveda. There's these are linked to the three root causes of disease, which is improper use of the senses, asatmya driyartha, which is associated with the moon, and then there's prajnaparada, which is associated with the Jupiter and has to do with the improper use of the intellect, and kala parinama, which is the effects of time and aging, which has to do with the sun. And to go a little deeper into those, so with the use of the senses in the moon, it's how we interact with the objects of the senses. Something tastes or excessive use of sound or underuse of sound, for example, or just how we're drawn about by the sensory world, by the outer world, is heavily influenced by how our moon is placed. And so if there are some negative influences, some negative aspects on the moon, whether rajasic or tamasic, that's going to come up with how we use our senses. And so that's an easy way to start to see how that may be one of the root causes of disease for us. You can also look at the fourth house, because the moon and the fourth house in the chart is intimately linked together. So looking in your chart at your fourth house, along with indications on the moon, can show some of the details if you're using your senses improperly and how you're using them improperly, and if that is creating problems for you in finding health. And you can look at things like the moon, if it's exalted, if it's in its own house, or if it's debilitated, it'll create problems along that sphere, as well as any influence of rajas or tamasic signs or planets or aspects with on the moon in the fourth house. So look at all those details we've kind of been covering and try to put it together for yourself. Along with that, Jupiter, the use of the intellect. And so this is that higher form of the intellect. So we have that kind of lower worldly form of the intellect, which is Mercury, which is quite more rajasic in its functioning. But then there's that higher use of the intellect shown by Jupiter. And so when you want to analyze this aspect, you can look at Jupiter a bit, but also pay a little more attention to the Lord of your ascendant, which Jupiter is the karaka, or the significator for the Lord of that ascendant, and see where the Lord of your ascendant has moved to. Because the ascendant shows our intrinsic, our basic intelligence, our basic wisdom about ourselves on a very deep level, and how we carry ourselves. And then where that ascendant Lord has gone will show how we're applying that intelligence to the world, and how that is coming out in the world. So if we are using that intrinsic intelligence properly in the world, will be shown by that Lagna Lord. And so if there's any heavily, once again, tamasic, rajasic kind of influences on that Lagna Lord, then it can create problems in this. So that idea of body wisdom and listening to what we know is good for us. So sometimes, many people have a lot of knowledge, a lot of information, are very aware people, but they may not use it and actually apply their intellect to the world and do what they know they need to do, So like you might know that coffee is bad for you, and I've struggled with this one, trust me. You might know that coffee is bad for you, for example, but you might still use it in order to get through, working or getting through your day-to-day life for various reasons, and that shows a faulty use of the intellect there. And then the last one, the sun, you can once again study the similar influences on the sun, the sign it's placed in, its ruler, aspects, things like that, and shows the effects of time. And so the sun can give a lot of things. The sun in general is really tied into our health, our vitality in the chart, and on a general basic level. But this idea of time is, can you live in step with what's appropriate for your age, for the season, for the day? Do you have an awareness of those deeper patterns, those steady patterns that are brought about? And the sun relates to this for various reasons. One of the easiest ways to wrap your head around it is the fact that the sun is a very steady planet. All the other planets revolve around the sun, and when we see the sun move through the sky, it moves roughly 1 degree a day, and it never really fluctuates from that. Whereas the other planets, there can be great fluctuation in their movements. So the sun's a very steady planet. It shows dharma, it shows a proper path, and keep on moving forward steadily and assuredly. So it's very sure-footed, and so when that's strong in a chart, so if it's exalted or in a good placement or being influenced by other sattvic means, then you can live in harmony and in rhythm with all the changes of life and time and day. But if it's not influenced well, then your perception may be off of those things. Your sense of rhythm, you may not be as aware of those things in your life. There's other uses of that concept with the sun, with vitality, and just to look really briefly at a chart, I want you to try to start to use this on your own without me kind of running through things for you. But just to give you an example really quick is look at Swami Vivekananda's chart, which we have been looking at in different ways. But right away you're going to see looking on his ascendant, you can see that right on the ascendant, we have the sattvic sign of Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, with the sattvic sun there. So that's giving a pretty deep intrinsic sattvic nature to the Swami as a basic indication. But then you see that Jupiter moves over to the rajasic sign of Libra, because Libra once again is a movable, it's a chara rashi, so it's got rajas. It likes to put those things into activity. So while the Swami may have had a sattvic base, he did do a lot in the world, and that's how he applied that intelligence. That's how he moved that intelligence into the world. And then looking at something like his moon placement, which you see is there in the 10th house in Virgo. Virgo, again, another dual sign. Okay, so there's an intrinsic dual nature there being emphasized on the moon, but it's Saturn's there aspecting the moon, and we do know he had some instability on the mental level. He had issues sleeping at night, insomnia, and so Saturn, which is a quintessential Vata planet, can bring insomnia and issues like that. On the dual side too, Saturn is also it's a tamas graha, and so it can bring some stability to the moon, to the mind, to the senses. Once again, showing actually an underuse of the senses at time. And so Saturn on the moon can create and give a pretty disciplined mind at times, which is not always easy, but it is seen in the charts of yogis and meditators quite often. So it can bring that. At the same time, it can bring depression and a host of other things. So you have to look at the overall influences of the chart. But knowing the Swami's life, and knowing and seeing those deeper kind of intrinsic sattvic patterns, then we can see that this is a spiritual person, and that moon, that Saturn, is probably giving him a lot of the stability and his ability to go deep into the sattva, into the meditation and that proper action in the world, that energetic force that he was in the world. And there's many other things to look at here in the chart as well. He did have some health issues, and many health issues actually, which a lot of that can be seen from the ascendant. It's couched by very Rajasic planets. You see Venus and Mercury there. It also has Rahu there. So there's a lot of other things to look at in reference, but you can see the basic patterns there for yourselves and how that's playing out in the lives of the Swami. And so, taking this information, I know it's a lot, especially if you're new to Jyotish or Ayurveda or any of this. I know it's a lot, but I want you to do some homework. Start to put this together for yourself and start to form your own understanding if you haven't yet. So I've given you some of the basic principles here, a basic idea to go about it. And I want you to look at your chart and just start to put together some of the information from the dosha balance that I gave before, and the effects of the planets here, and the gunic effects of the root causes of disease, and put something together, any kind of writing you want to pick apart your chart and send it to me, email it to me. And include as much depth as you can get into. Include reflections on your life. Also include if something doesn't seem to be making sense, or you don't feel it fits your perception of who you are, how you live. If your chart feels off in any way, bring that up too. There's no point in trying to fit yourself into the chart. Oftentimes, this can't happen. So it's more important to keep an open mind, try to be clear about what's going on, and have a discussion about it. Decipher whatever you can, and please send it along to me with your reflections. We can go from there, and I'm just curious to see what you guys are coming up with, where everybody is at with this material, if you're doing the exercises, how things are coming along with the course so far, because we are going to take it to a little next level. And if you do find a little overwhelmed by all this information right now, we will be getting into Jyotish, into the planets and placements and everything a little bit more later. But I just wanted to touch on these little things here and there just to keep it in the back of your mind, so everything's getting integrated as we move along. Everything's moving along together. And so that's the basics here. And I hope this has been useful, and I hope you can start to think about this stuff for yourself, put it together a little. Don't worry if you're wrong, if it's not making sense, but see what you can do, and I hope you're well.